everyone. Welcome to our first ever literary edition of the Encores Club. Our guest today is one of my favorite music writers, Annie Zaleski, in addition to serving as the managing editor for Alternative Press. Annie has appeared in Rolling Stone, Spin, Billboard, The Village Voice, and online publications like Vulture and AV Club. But the reason we are here today is she is about to release a 33 and a third book on Duran's Rio.
Yay!
As a huge fan of the series, I am beyond excited that Duran is getting the recognition they deserve with a book in the 33 and a third legacy. You can find her on Twitter at Annie Zaleski, and I highly recommend you do because she just recently published an article on Pretty in Pink. That is one of the best things I've read in music in the last couple months. It's absolutely fantastic. Annie, welcome to Encore's Club. How are things in Cleveland?
Things are good. It's sunny. It's almost spring, which is very exciting, and so it's going to stop snowing, and we can actually go outside again.
Believe it or not, when hiking this morning, we have snow here in Las Vegas.
Whoa!
Yeah. So you have sunshine, we have snow. The world's
Yeah.
upside down. Before we talk, the book comes out May 26th. What is the best way for people to pre
So it
order?
actually comes out May 6th.
May 6th. I'm sorry. What's the best way for people to pre order?
So the variety of things. It's on Amazon all over the world, depending on where you are. You can also get it from, I believe, IndieBound and Bookshop .org. I will double check that. Yeah, bookshop.org as well. And you can also call your local bookstore, your local independent bookstore, and they will should also carry that as well.
Awesome. So hit pause right now, go pre order because you're going to want this, and then come back and we're going to keep talking. The first big question I have for you is why Rio?
Oh my God, you start off with the big questions.
Yep.
So I have been a fan of this record. I mean, probably obviously since the moment I heard it. And so we're talking. I heard about it. I'm a little bit younger, so I heard it in the '90s, and I immediately connected with it. I mean, obviously, everyone knows all the singles, Rio and Hungry Like the Wolf, but just the sound of the record, you can kind of hear it. It really predicted where music went in every direction. It predicted where rock music went. It predicted grunge. It predicted dance music. Predicted MTV synth pop. And and because the songwriting is so strong. I mean, when you look at a record, a lot of new wave records, they have great singles. They have the singles that everyone knows, and then there's a lot of filler. It's like all right, you don't feel like you got your money's worth. Rio is so well sequenced, and the songwriting is so strong. I've listened to this, of course, dozens and dozens and dozens of times over the years, and I'm never tired of it because it's just a really complete statement.
Would agree. If there's one misstep on it, and I always get stuck on this one, it's
Uh-huh.
the version of My Own Way they chose. I love the night
Really?
version. I love the disco strings. I'm kind of a disco guy, so I get really excited about that. And when I hear the album version, I always get a little like, oh, I wish it was the night version. But I mean, it's a minor quibble. Is there any songs on there that you're kind of like, maybe that wasn't the strongest choice?
See, what's funny about that is that My Own Way, I didn't hear that version of the single until years and years and years and years later. And I think it was actually when YouTube finally started becoming popular. And like it blew my mind because it was so different.
Very.
So I like, and I mean, there's so many different versions of My Own Way anyway, beyond what's on the record. But I don't. I like every song on the record. And I can't say that about every record by even some of my favorite bands. And so I like every song on the record.
One thing I love about your music writing, since you mentioned that, is the range of artists you cover. And it reminds me of the record collection behind me, where Duran and Cowboy Junkies are kind of polar ends of the emotional scale, if you will. Who are some of your all-time favorite artists, the ones that you go back to so often?
So I think another one of my big ones is REM. I've been an REM fan probably as long as I've been a Duran fan, and so I've always really gravitated toward their songwriting. And honestly, they're probably about as far away from Duran as you can get in terms of everything. But they've always also I've always gravitated toward them. Pretty much if any band from England in the '80s, Depeche Mode, The Cure. I'm wearing an OMD shirt. You can't tell, so I love OMD. We talked earlier about Thompson Twins. I love Thompson Twins, and so all of that stuff. I was also a massive, massive Britpop fan in the '90s, and so Blur is another band that I keep going back to. and power pop. There's some, different people like Tommy Keene is a songwriter. He passed away sadly a few years ago, but he's one of my favorite songwriters. Crowded House too.
Yeah.
So if it's from Australia or New Zealand, probably chances are I like them too. The Chills, Go Betweens. So I have very diverse tastes, and so it's difficult to kind of pin down what I like sometimes.
Well, that's good though, and it kind
It
of keeps us
is
interested.
absolutely.
um, the 33 and a third series, I mean, it's such a wide range. Some of the books I've read, I mean, some of them get so into the studio minutia of how a snare drum was mic'd, whereas others are a lot more focused on the cultural impact of what the album did in terms of the world. Where do you think your book will fall on that spectrum?
So I think my book actually splits the difference between both of those things. I think especially for Duran Duran fans, they've heard so many stories over the years of how Rio was kind of put together. And so I basically kind of in a narrative way, traced, all right, here's how the album kind of unfolded. And I talked to Nick and John and Roger and, got, insights from them, of course, on how that all kind of went. And they gave me some, awesome insights, I think, that actually haven't been out there, which is cool. But I also talked about the cultural impacts. I think that's the other thing that's always really fascinated me about Rio is that obviously, it was one of the first big real MTV albums, when that it was really helped the success in America, especially by MTV. But then just also looking at, how many, and I started mentioning this, how many bands are influenced by them. When I sat down and really started looking at it, it was astounding. It was just how many people over the years were like, oh yeah, they're playing or this, that. I mean, they've literally touched every corner of pop and rock music through the last, 35 years. So, and so that was very cool too. So I talked a little bit about that. And then also kind of talked a little bit about, how the album became a success in America. Because one of the things that's always fascinated me about it is that, now everyone's like, oh yeah, Duran Duran, Hungry Like the Wolf. It's a radio staple. But
Mhm.
it took so long to
Exactly.
actually make
Took a
it its
remix.
success. Yeah, and so I did a lot of research looking at kind of archival magazines and charts and talking to radio people from the time, to be like what they remembered about the band to kind of really dig into like, how did this happen? And so it was very exciting, because it was always like a puzzle to try to solve. Because I mean, it's obvious. You hear it, it's a hit, Hungry
Yeah.
Like the Wolf is a hit. Like it sounds amazing on the radio to this day, but radio and music was so so different in 1982 when that came out, and so and you really when you look at the charts, you're just like, wow, okay, it really hits home about that.
Yeah, there was a big delay between the UK and the US success. And,
Absolutely.
one of my articles for Daily Durani was actually, I really went in and headphoned it and really tried to pick out the differences in the remixes. And Hold Back the Rain was the one that jumped out at me the most as being noticeably different. But honestly, to me, they sound so similar. Like either way, they should have been massive hits. But like you said, radio is different.
And radio, and what really hit home is just how because I mean I think now the 80s, everyone loves the 80s. The 80s is this thing, like Stranger Things, and bands love to emulate it. But like when Rio came out, that was just starting. The Human League had just had a hit in America. Soft Cell like had their hit in America. Obviously Gary Newman and M and Blondie had hits, but like that was not that they were the exceptions rather than the rule. And like when you kind of started looking at things, it was shocking because you forget that now. And so when you actually dive into it, you're like, wow, Duran Duran was kind of a weird outlier on the radio like back then, because it was Rush and Bob Seger and Steve Miller and Journey. And today it totally makes sense together, but back then it was like, what is this? It's so weird. So it's fascinating, really.
Yeah, and I think I came of age at a weird time. Like I really didn't listen to radio before MTV. I literally discovered music as MTV launched. So to me, discovering music was a visual thing. And my first records I bought were "Past the Duchy" by Musical Youth and "I Eat Cannibals" because they had really eye-striking videos. So when Duran Duran started getting airplay, I was like, okay, this is massive. This is the biggest thing in the world. But I didn't know what radio was doing because I didn't listen to radio yet. I was 9 years old. My parents listened to country music. As far as I know, they were on the radio, but I didn't know about it. One thing you mentioned is you didn't really hear Rio until the 90s.
Yeah.
Uh, at the time, growing up in the 80s, Duran Duran was so often dismissed as, just pretty boys and stuff. But you discovered him in the 90s. Was that aura around the band still there, or were people a little more open-minded?
So I found out about the band from the Wedding album, and so I think that's why a lot of my perspective on the band is different. Because when I started, they were all over MTV, and so when I started watching, it was Come Undone, and it was Ordinary World video, and I mean that video is shows them in suits and they're grown up, and
Yeah.
it's just such a different persona than they were in the 80s. But also there was too much information, which was I think I love that single. That was the single that I
Underrated video too.
so underrated. That was like that video was like my favorite thing. It was
I
just,
always say it's like a box of Skittles that just blows open. They're all so
right,
colorful in it.
absolutely, and that song too, like, it just I know, so and I've always really liked, synth music and electronic music, and so that just, like, connected with me. So I had such a different perspective because, I knew them as, growing up in Cleveland, they were playing big venues, they were this band making these songs, and so and I mean, at the same time, though, because alternative radio was blowing up, they had, like, flashback lunches, and they had retro lunches, and so all of that new stuff was being played with all their older stuff at the same time. So it's this really interesting jumble of kind of old and new, retro and contemporary together. And so, it all made sense to me. There were no I didn't really bring the same, I think, biases that other people might have brought to the table. But I mean, I remember if I was trying to remember, but I feel like Rio was also even hard to find almost in the 90s. I mean,
Mm.
I didn't have a ton of spending money anyway, so I took the CD out of the library. But I feel like it was like hard to find almost, which is like mind blowing to think about, now when you can find, obviously with streaming, you can, push of a button, but it was almost like this mythical thing to me. So it was cool.
Very cool. You mentioned you discovered him with the Wedding album. What was the first time you saw him live?
I saw them on the Bedazzleland tour in
Wow.
'97. Yes. And so, and I, because I was not allowed to go to shows when I was a kid. My parents were like, you are not allowed to go to, clubs, but they played a high school auditorium, 10 minutes from my house that didn't serve alcohol. And I was still underage. And so my parents were like, like I was allowed to drive there. So I saw that same fall. So it was '97. I saw Radiohead do on their OK Computer tour, Morrissey, and then Duran Duran, like, all within the span of, like, 4 months.
Wow.
So it was a good that was, like, my first, like, bunch of show going, so I got really spoiled. But yeah,
Definitely.
it was the Dazzleland tour, and I reviewed it for my high school newspaper, and I wrote a really embarrassing review. But I was so excited. I was so, so, so excited about it. They played that tour, they played a lot of their really, really early singles, and I just remember being thrilled. But I love Midazolam. I think when people say like, "What's the most underrated corner of their catalog?" I always name that record because I love that record.
I would agree. I'm a big believer in that, and actually, I would defend Red Carpet Massacre more than most people. I
Really?
like
Hmm.
I just like the sound of it on some of the tracks. I mean, just it works for me more so than even Astronaut. So
Wow, that's a bold statement.
yeah, I'm gonna probably get fired from Daily Durante for saying that. Rhonda, I know, is not a fan, but and different times in your life, you discover different the artist. Certain albums will mean more to you at different times in your life. So I'm sure a couple years from now, I may have a totally different opinion and changes. But I think we can all agree, going back to Rio, Rio is the one that most people are going to go back to. It's just so iconic.
And I mean, you have I think everything just combined on that record, not even just musically, but just, obviously the artwork as well, and just the theme, like the entire package, it's a three-dimensional package in general. And I think that's another reason why it had such cultural impact is that, I mean, Forever 21 just did this huge last year, this Patrick Nagel line of amazing t-shirts, and I
Mhm.
mean, and he's in pop culture, because people see him every day with, when Rio comes out, I mean, there's so much of that record really still reverberates today, but I completely agree.
At where I work, we have a music host who are kind of like a nerdy version of me where like we walk around, we give tours of memorabilia, we play music for people. But I was interviewing one candidate and I said, hey, what do you think's the most iconic album cover of the 80s? And he goes, oh, it's Duran Duran Rio. I was like, well, you're hired.
I was gonna say
Yes,
hired
it
on the
is.
spot.
Because for me, the artwork meant a lot because everyone talked about how pretty they were and stuff. But I mean, it's a painting on the album cover. This is the album that's supposed to break the band globally, and they're not relying on their looks with the album cover. John Taylor's cheekbones are not on the cover; it's a painting. So I think that was a bold statement by the band, and I don't think they get enough credit for that as musicians and as a band writing real songs. They were going to crack it based on the music and not just their image.
I think that's a really good point too, and it's the right image. I mean, there was obviously the other potential version of it ended up on a single cover, and they were like, this woman's it. This is it because it's so mysterious. Like when I see that cover, I want to listen to it. I want to know more. Like, what is this? You're not quite sure what it is, but it's kind of mysterious and seductive, but also kind of mischievous and it conveys so many moods and I mean, but it can captures what Rio is too. It captures so much of what the music is as well. It's a celebration and it's fun and it's escapism and it's ecstatic. So yeah, absolutely.
If there's one unsung hero in the Duran Duran story, a person I think was really significant, it's Colin Thurston. And I'm just curious, as you were doing interviews with the band, how often did he come up? Did they talk about him much?
They did come up, and I that is the one person that I'm so sad that he's not here anymore to interview because he's done so many of my favorite records. But he did come up, and the band, had nothing but great things to say about him, because they were so young when they worked with him. I mean, you forget that, like he was kind of one of their, first guiding, forces in there, and you know, like they've said over the years, it was very true, that he just like really helped them and just really worked. He connected with them and he understood what they wanted and they were able to communicate that with him, so everyone was just on the same wavelength. And I think that's so interesting too because like a lot of bands, they don't find that right away.
Yeah,
They work with producers or producers are too heavy handed and so they clash, and they really kind of locked into that relationship right away, which for the first two records, which you don't find. And what's so interesting too is the first two records sound so different.
yeah.
Colin, but I mean, but every record Colin did sounded different. I mean, when you actually like look at his discography, I'm a big fan of Talk Talk too, and he did the first Talk Talk record, which came out around Rio. And it's so interesting when you listen to it because, Mark Hollis obviously is another pop genius, was sadly.
Yeah.
But he brings that what I like about Colin is that he really allowed the individual strengths of the bands he worked with come to the surface.
Hmm.
He wasn't trying to mold Duran Duran into something. He kind of directed them and coaxed them into, what they were going to be. And I think that's a strength a lot of producers don't have either. Like he was kind of the perfect person to work with them.
Agreed. And I think there's certain bands I think need the right producer. And Duran Duran, as I look back over their 40 years, their best work seems to be when they have the right producer on board for an entire album. I thought Ronson was great with All You Need Is Now. And then Paper Gods, there was multiple producers, and I think the resulting product just wasn't up to par with some of the previous work. So I definitely think someone like Colin, you need that one producer who's going to guide the project from start to finish.
And it's so interesting because that's such a modern pop phenomenon too, like working with different producers when, back in the day it was you were going to go to the studio for 3 months with one person, and now it's like, it might be a little bit piecemeal and working with people. It's interesting. I really like Paper Gods. I see your thing there. I really like Paper Gods. I think, and I saw that tour a couple times too. And so I have a special spot in my heart for that.
Something about that tour, they just could not leave Vegas. I think at the end of the day, including Life is Beautiful Festival, I think there was 8 Vegas shows. Uh,
Whoa. I'm
I
so
mean,
jealous.
maybe it wasn't all officially the Paper Gods tour. They were just a couple coming
Yeah,
to Vegas for the weekend. I think you were at one of them, but
I
it
was.
was still kind of the Paper Gods tour as far as was concerned. So
I'm so jealous. They haven't been to Cleveland. I saw their last show here, and I think it was 2012, 2011. So we went to Detroit to see the show, which was fine because Chic opened and it was amazing.
yeah,
But yeah,
awesome. You mentioned you're wearing an OMD shirt, and
I
for
am.
me, there's certain bands that like later in life I start to rediscover, and for me, OMD, I think their last 3 albums are actually my 3 favorite OMD albums, especially Punishment of Luxury. Are there any other bands from the 80s that maybe you've rediscovered in recent years that you're like, oh my God, how did I not really appreciate them more before now?
OMD definitely because I saw them live. They played with Howard Jones and Bare Naked Ladies, and I'd never seen them before because I hadn't really toured, and I was blown away that like
Incredible show.
so incredible, and that put me kind of on a jag, back in, rediscovering their catalog. That's a really good question because I'm always listening to the 80s. Actually, well, probably about 20 years ago when I was in college, I was super big into Japan and I was
Mhm.
super big into psychedelic furs. And over the years, I've sort of, I'd kind of not listened to them as much. And so I've really started getting into them again, both of
Mhm.
them. I saw the Furs, I think 2019, they played with James in Cleveland. And
Yep.
I was so excited. I love James. And the Furs were amazing. The Furs were really good. And they put out a really good record last year, too. And so, it made me, because I really like the early records that are a little bit darker and more
Yeah.
post-punk and moody. And, I rediscovered, I'm like, God, they're such, you forget how good of a band they are. And then Japan too. I mean, Japan, obviously, it's like, they're big influence on Duran and, contemporaries too. But, you forget how awesome those records sound too. And so they just had a reissue come out. So I've been sort of
Mhm.
getting back into them too as well.
The other one I've dove really deep into because I've seen them a couple times in Vegas in recent years is The Fix, and I mean, so
Yes.
many good records. I'm like, why wasn't this band bigger? I'm like I feel like there was more than just a few singles to The Fix, and they never really got the recognition they needed.
And because I feel like they cut the difference between synth pop and a little bit proggy, because like they toured with
Yeah.
Todd Rundgren, and so that was which might seem kind of like an odd pairing on the surface. I actually remembered another band I've super gotten into is Ice House
Oh
in the
yeah.
last year, and I've always kind of loved Ice House, but like during the early lockdown last year, I was pretty much listening to nothing but Ice House. They're like 50 greatest hits. And
Mhm.
they put out a live record because they did a reunion show or an anniversary show, and they did all these covers of stuff they used to do back in the day. So it's like, all their awesome hits, and then it's like a Bowie cover and a Sex Pistols cover and
Nice.
stuff. And
Mhm.
it
In
so
terms of the lockdown and this project, how far along were you when the world kind of came to a stop, and how much writing did you get done during the pandemic?
well, I did a couple of interviews before the lockdown, but pretty
Mhm.
much all of the writing and all the interviews happened during the lockdown.
Wow.
Yes. So it was, I mean, on one hand, it was really good to have this project to work on
Mhm.
because it's a project that is something that obviously was making me really happy. So it was really nice when, the everything in the world felt very scary and uncertain and anxiety inducing. I had this great thing to like write about and I could talk to people about Duran, which I love doing. And, I do that all the time.
Mhm.
So I was like, this is cool. Okay. But yeah, it was I will say that I'm one of the things I'm most proud of the book is the fact that I got it done during the pandemic because I was like, it was, I knew what I needed to say. I probably could have made the book 50,000 words and because I had, so much stuff. But I'm proud that I got it done. But yeah, it was challenging, and there were some people that I couldn't get a hold of, and there were some people that, which I completely understand. Like, really, if that's the one thing that I think the pandemic has taught us, like, if someone's like, "I'm sorry, I can't do this," it's all good, no
Yeah.
worries about, like you give yourself and other people grace, and
Mhm.
so that's my one lesson just in general I've learned.
Who do you think you spoke to the most from the band for this project?
Definitely Nick.
Definitely Nick.
Yeah, and I mean, because obviously he is just, he has the memory and he has the, there were some fact checking details and I would send over to him and things like that. And so he was extremely patient and extremely generous with his time, and I'm very happy about that.
Nice. In terms of Duranis who are like hardcore into the band and have watched every DVD on Rio and stuff, uh, going into this book, what do you think they're going to be most excited to find?
That's a good question. It's hard for me to know because I'm a pretty big fan. I think you have to be to kind of, write a book on a band and
Yeah.
still, come out liking them at the end because I've had other people who have written books and they're like, you will hate this after. And I was like, I can't let this happen. But nope, still a fan. Um, I think because I talked to different people. I talked to some people like because I'm from Cleveland and Duran was massive in Cleveland. Like they played on their first couple tours, they played here. And Jane Scott, who was our legendary music critic, did this massive story on them in 1981, talking about New Romantics. She went to the show. She talked to people. She talked to Ruth Polsky she talked to people saying, what is this whole scene? Like, so they got a lot of coverage. And so I tracked down some people who really supported the band early on in America. and talk to them about that. And I think some people that would surprise a lot of people because I think, there's a lot of people who think, oh, Duran, they came out of nowhere for Rio. And it's like I found, building up to it on the first record, they had some support. They really did in
Yeah.
America. It was sporadic, and it was kind of in spots, but they had support. They were big in Cleveland. So I kind of tracked down some people, and I think, I'm hoping that people, see a little bit more, the fact that here's how this kind of worked, and you might be surprised, that it was all they really worked hard and they really set up for things too.
Hmm.
That was I think that's the thing that surprised me the most is when you kind of actually look back at everything. Rio came so quickly. The band formed, they released the debut, and then Rio came out. It was such a quick, meteoric rise. But everything that they had that ambition and they had that plan to kind of get that going. And so I think when you actually sit down and put together the timeline and you look at it, it's even more impressive than you think.
Agreed. I interviewed Clem Burke of Blondie a couple years back, and
Like
my
drummer.
wife's of course like, do not ask about Duran because I always somehow bring it up. So I was like, so when Duran joined you on the road in those, that early run, you got any good stories? And he's like, nothing that would be appropriate. I can't share that stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, they must have been having fun.
Well, and I think Blondie, I read because I think when Debbie's book came out,
Mhm.
she talked about like what an awful tour that was just for her personally. It seems like poor Blondie was just not in a great place at that point. I think they
Yeah,
broke up like right after the tour
yeah,
too. And so that's the one thing. So I found a lot of different bootlegs and things like that. I was trying to find like an 82 like Blondie bootleg or, because to see their tour, because it supposedly had a really cool stage setup.
hmm,
I wasn't able to find that. I was kind of disappointed, because there's some really great 82 Duran shows that have surfaced and some like, there's a couple of YouTube accounts and things like that. But I really wanted to see, compare how they sounded with Blondie and I couldn't find it. So I was bummed about that. Because I love Blondie. I mean,
I have a
unbelievable.
Cleveland Duran bootleg. It might be the Medazzaland tour.
It is, yes. I have friends so the crazy thing about that show is so my now husband was at that show, and we didn't know each other. We didn't meet each other until 12 years later, but he was at that show, and another one of my really good friends was also at that show, and he gave me that bootleg, like, years later. He's like, "Oh, I found this," type thing. So I had, like, all these friends at the show who are now, like, some of my, best friends and my husband, and we were all at that show. We didn't know it. And so I was like, "That's cool." That those were we were
All
the hardcore.
connected.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that was a good I believe and that show was so sad though, because it was right after Michael Hutchence died.
Hmm.
And so it was definitely a little bit more of a somber show. And I still remember that because I was pretty young and that was really I was so sad when I've always been an In fan too, and I was so sad when Michael died. It's such a tragic story still.
Absolutely. I didn't see Duran until the Big Thing tour. I saw Power Station '85, but
Oh, that's cool.
not that I hold a grudge against my parents, who I love, but I did not get to go see the 1984 Seven and the Ragged Tiger tour because it was a school night. I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday when they played Miami, Florida. So they didn't let me go.
You would have been home, like, not that late.
It was notorious. It was a really awful arena way out in the Everglades of Florida, and it used to be notorious. One lane road in and out, and I remember like David Lee Roth, we were in traffic for like 4 hours. It was a miserable. It's the only arena I've ever heard of where they had a rain delay, and it was indoors because the roof leaked so much. I think it was Robert Plant. They had to delay the concert because of rain. So
Is that I doubt it's not still open now, right?
no, that they imploded it very soon after. Miami Arena opened probably '88, and then Duran played there on the Big Thing tour in '89. So that was the first time I got to see him. So
You
I
saw
miss
the
those
Power
big old
Station show.
arenas.
I do too. We had one in Cleveland, the Richfield Coliseum, and I believe that's where Duran played. And I was like, I was way too young. But they played on the wedding album tour. I remember they played, I think it was a radio station show at Blossom Music Center, which was, our big outdoor amphitheater. It's really beautiful. It was built for the orchestra, so it has good acoustics. And I was like way too, I wasn't even going to concerts yet. I think I was like, you think back when you're a kid, you're like, how did I get money? How did I, was
Yeah,
able to do that? But I was at the point where it was just like, yeah, no. I was just starting to buy records and starting to, take my little bit of money and buying tapes and stuff like that.
my parents were very open minded. As long as the grades were good, concerts were okay. So I got to see Madonna in '87, Howard Jones. I got to see on the Dream into Action. I was in sixth grade and we had like fifth row. I thought it was the coolest thing on earth. because he had the mime still
Oh,
going.
yeah, and he
So,
had didn't he have, like, platforms on
yep.
in that tour too?
It
'Cause
was
I've
an
seen
incredible
footage of that.
stage setup, but I
Yeah.
think it was the first night of the tour, and there was tons of technical difficulties, which is funny because the last 2 times he's played Vegas, his MacBooks have overheated, and he's had to go acoustic for a song or 2 while they cooled off. Summer shows in Vegas outdoors are never a good idea.
That's what happened when OMD played in Cleveland. It was like we have probably every so often we have, like, less than 10 days a year where it's over 90 degrees. And that was one of the shows. And so they were all wearing, like, all black. It's like,
And the way
90
he moves
degrees,
around on
it's humid.
stage.
Right. And I interviewed, I think it was Paul I interviewed later, and I think I mentioned that, and he was just like, yeah, our like keyboards were overheating because it was awful. It was just like I still remember how warm I was being there because we're like dancing and moving around, and it was just gross. And so yeah.
Yeah, I
But yeah,
I
it's great.
shot I shot that Howard Jones show. I was in the photo pit and I was just dying. I was like, "How are they performing?" Like, I am dying with a camera around my neck. So,
Yeah,
Boy George also, he was not too fond of it when Culture Club did an outdoor show a couple summers ago.
I
Uh,
bet.
he's a bit of a diva when it comes to being
Eh,
comfortable.
I don't blame him though, I completely and, he's
100
from England.
degrees. I mean, it's
Yeah, he's from
ridiculous.
England. They're not used to that, they didn't grow up with that. I totally get it.
What was the
So
last show you saw before the shutdown?
it's funny, I've been trying to remember that. I think it was, I only saw a couple shows last year because like, we had all tickets to all these things that just didn't happen, but I saw, it was an acoustic show. It was, Grantley Phillips, Kristen Hirsch from Throwing Muses, and John Doe of X
Mhm.
doing the show. And it was great, of course. I'm a big Grantley Buffalo fan and Grantley Phillips. Um, and yeah, it was great. It was fantastic. We talked to John. This was like mid-February.
Mhm.
And then I think, we had tickets to see, Harry Styles, we had Rolling Stones tickets, we had Bikini Kill tickets. Things were just starting to kind of ramp up in terms of tickets. And then, because in Cleveland, basically our months where there's nothing going on is December, January, and February touring wise, because nobody wants to come here, which I completely understand. And so, yeah, so it was pretty much like, okay. So, we have tickets to a couple things that are rescheduled for October. Will they happen? I don't know. It's weird. If I had, I would love to hop on a plane and go see Duran at Hyde Park with Grace Jones
Yeah.
because like I Grace Jones played in Detroit, which is about a 2.5, 3 hour drive, and I didn't go to the show. But I that's like one of my concert regrets. I mean, I think we all now that there's been, no concerts for the last year. We're like, we really should have, made the jaunt to do that. But a
Always go
friend
to
of
the
mine
show.
went. Yeah, exactly. Always go to the show. And my friend went, was sending us video, and she's probably on my bucket list in terms of artists. But
Who have
you
you
know,
s who have you seen the most in concert?
actually, probably it was probably REM. I saw them 13 times, and, I started seeing them in the mid-90s, and then I saw them all the way up until their final tour in 2009? Yeah, so but I followed them and things like that, so that's probably the biggest one, but I'm trying to remember, I've seen so many shows over there, I've lost count.
Yeah.
I kinda kept good records, but not really, but, there are different bands that I've forgotten about that I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I did see them," and so I can't even remember at this point.
I've tried to piece them together. Actually, when I was pitching 33 and a third for Cowboy Junkies, I tried to get a list together of
Oh,
the
yeah.
Cowboy Junkie shows I've seen, and I'm around 125. But
Cool.
I think there's a few I've missed. Like I can't remember certain tours, and I've had friends correct me who travel with me to shows and stuff, and they're like, "No, we went on the road in 2007." I'm like, "Are you sure?" I don't remember.
Yeah, you forget, I wish I'd kept better, notes. Like I have different journals I've kept over the years and things that I can kind of reconstruct. And, certain shows stick out more than others.
Mhm.
But it's, you just lose track because it's, I've seen Howard Jones a lot because he's weirdly come to Cleveland a lot in recent years.
Yeah,
So I've
he's
seen
toured
him
quite
a
a bit.
lot. But nothing close to that though. Nothing close to REM.
Awesome. And this Rio's coming out, but you're already working on another project, right? B-52s.
I am. I'm working on a book on the B-52s on basically it's called Why the B-52s Matter. So it's basically kind of a looking at the band and a cultural history, and talking about their music and their impact. So it's a very different book. The Duran book is definitely very, reported. I talk to people and, some criticism and, cultural, analysis and fun stuff. But then the B-52s one is a little bit more, I don't like music critic-y kind of,
Mhm.
I don't know. So I'm kind of revising my manuscript and going through it now. So, but that was I started working on that last year too, and that was another joy. I mean, being able to listen to the Duran and the B-52s during a lockdown, like, that's, throwing on I love, the B-52s have such a small but mighty catalog, and I like
Yeah.
all of their records. So,
When can we expect to see that? Do you have a target date for
well,
it?
I think it's coming out sometime in 2022.
Okay.
I don't have a target date yet, but that's I think they tweeted yesterday about that, so 2022.
Excellent. Will there be an Annie Zaleski book tour to promote Rio?
Man, so I I think that things in terms of, in-person stuff, I don't think that's able to happen yet. I know I would love to book a virtual Zoom tour. So I'm talking to some people and working on that. The nice thing about it is because the record, I love that the book is coming out and I didn't plan this the week of the album's, actual release back in the day.
Mm,
So, it came out on May 10th. And so I did not plan that, but I told the publisher, I'm
perfect.
like, that was a really good pick. But because, the record's turning 40 in 2022, I feel like that I could potentially do like a, delayed, hey, Rio's turning 40, we're going on tour again type
Yeah.
thing. So I'd love to. I mean, I'm totally open to it. And there'd be nothing, leaving my house at this point would be amazing to do anything. But to talk about Rio, even better. So, I'll probably, anything I'm going to be doing will be on my Twitter feed. And,
Mhm.
I'm probably going to start a newsletter. Actually, I was thinking about that even tonight to kind of group everything together. But I don't
Absolutely.
know. If people want me to come to talk about Rio, they can always get in touch.
You're welcome in Vegas anytime.
I know, as we've talked about, I think we have a lot of mutual friends there,
Yeah.
and I would love to do something in Vegas. So I think I need to, I'm starting to kind of plot out. I feel like I need to go on like I feel like a band booking my own tour. Like I need a booking agent. Like be like, all right, going to Vegas. I'm going to drive to LA then because
Mm.
I've been to the Zia Records. I actually bought a copy of Hungry Like the Wolf on a 12-inch when I was in Vegas
All right.
years ago.
Zia just reopened in a new location. They have a big new store. So,
Really? Bigger
yeah.
than the one that was there? 'Cause that
Yeah,
was pretty.
they have
Wow.
2 locations now, and the new one is absolutely massive. And then we have 2 record cities. We have Moondog. I think we're up to 8 record stores total.
I've
Uh,
only been to a couple of them, so that means and there's nothing I like more than going record shopping.
I will make sure you get the full tour.
Okay, awesome.
Once again, what's the best place to pre-order this book?
So you can pre-order it. Actually, I should have said to bookshop.org. You can also go to Bloomsbury, their website, I think it's just bloomsbury.com. If you Google Bloomsbury and then Duran Rio 33 and a third, it'll come out. IndieBound as well should have it. Also Amazon, and then ask your local bookstore. They should be able to get it too. So if you have your local independent bookstores, and I have been supporting my independent bookstore in the pandemic, calling
Virtually.
yes, saying, "Hey, can you send this?" And they've been great. So, I also, I think when you order through IndieBound and Bookshop too, that also kind of connects you with that as well. So there's a lot of different places. And I'm gonna be putting together actually a list of where people can pre-order, like a whole link of stuff, just so it's easier to get passed around too.
Excellent. And what number book is this in the series?
It's 156.
Wow. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to
It's
keep up. There's so many great books in this series.
no,
I mean,
I
it's
know.
overwhelming sometimes.
And I asked you, like, what was behind you because it's funny because the different friends of mine over the years have written these books. Like a friend of mine wrote the Devo book, which is so good, and the Neutral Milk Hotel book I really really
Mhm.
like too. And I read the which one did I read recently? There's actually one on cover albums that's really interesting, on like the Leonard Cohen tribute
Mhm.
from the '90s, which is just he took a really really interesting kind of approach to it as well. And so, I mean, we have so many of those in our house too. A friend of mine wrote the Slayer book, and I like metal, but I didn't know a whole ton about Slayer, and I was just like, I learned so much about that, from that. He was so passionate and talked to so many people, and it was cool.
I
So
think
yeah,
this book I'm super excited for because I don't think there's anything in the series that really represents a decade like Rio did. I mean, the
no,
mainstream success as well as the critical acclaim is just, the series tends to go a little more towards the critical darlings and
yeah,
things like that. So I think you're bringing something new to the series, and on behalf of Durani's everywhere, thank you.
you're welcome. And you know what? It's been so gratifying to hear that because I think, and I think one of the things and one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is that I've always thought over the years that the band as musicians have been supremely underrated, just in terms of because people, heard them in the 80s and saw them in the 80s, and they're like, especially in pop music, it's like, oh, you can't be pretty looking and you can't also make good music. And they really, as musicians and songwriters are amazing. And it's been really gratifying the last decade to see that really kind of shift.
Hmm.
I think last year when John did his Stone Love Bass Odyssey bass tutorials, and everyone basically flipped out over it. And I would read, I love reading all the YouTube comments because it's like, metal guys saying, I really like metal, but he's a really good bass player, or like finally people, my kid is listening to this, and when John did the Reddit AMA and there were all these teenagers asking tips, like that made me really happy because I think people are tide is finally turning and people are realizing what a great band they are. And so that's one of the takeaways I want people to also take away from the book. Why I really wanted to write it is like, no, you really need to give these guys respect and they really deserve it. And so,
Absolutely. You mentioned metal. One of my coworkers, he's gone on to join a band called Five Finger Death Punch, and he's the
oh
bass
yeah,
player. And
absolutely.
one of the Vegas shows, I look over and just a few seats away from me, it's Chris from Five Finger Death Punch checking out John, and he's like, "Dude, that guy plays so good." I'm like,
Right?
"Exactly. It's what I've been saying since
Oh,
'82."
it's so funny how many hard rock guys and metal guys really are into Duran Duran. I mean, I don't know if you heard, there've been a couple of like hair metal guys that have done covers. Did you hear the Girls on Film cover that came out
Yes.
recently? Yeah, so there's that. Um, but yeah, it's so I love that, and I feel like my guys, like this is when Nick got the award, and I think it was the guy from Dream Theater who was waxing ecstatic, and I'm like, I want to talk to you about Duran Duran because
Yeah.
I mean, Dream Theater is amazing, and I like Dream Theater anyway. But I was like, hello, again, they have such a wide influence, and musicians have always respected them, and fans, of course, know it too. But I think there's still, I still, when I first started, saying I wrote this book, there were some still skeptics who were like, oh, I don't know. And then I was like, jumping in the comments, being like, here's why you're wrong.
Yeah, and if there's one piece of their puzzle that I think really broke them away from that new romantic thing, it was Andy. And he did add that musical muscle, and it was rock and roll. It was dance, it was funk, it was pop, but it was rock and roll too.
And I heard him on Sirius last year when he came on to talk about when Eddie Van Halen passed.
Mhm.
And he had such amazing insights into Eddie as a
That
guitar
was a
player.
great interview.
Yeah, that was a really great interview. And just hearing about, I think he saw Van Halen with Black Sabbath, that, legendary tour. But, when you hear him talk about that, you also see that, he had such a musicality he also brought to the band because he's such a guitar player and
Yeah.
he's the rare guy you can have the feel and the kind of the analytical bit. And usually when, guitar players, you don't necessarily have that. And so he has that kind of balance and that gift. But yeah, like especially when you start listening to bootlegs, whenever people are like, "Oh, Duran Duran," whatever, I'm like, go listen to a bootleg from Madison Square Garden from
Mhm.
1984. Go listen to what a tight, hot band they were at that point, just as players, and so I think so that is my crusade always to tell people they were a great band. They should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So
Well, now they're on the bookshelves with 33 and a third. That's
exactly. I'm like,
awesome.
yeah, I'm very, very excited. It is a sign of respect, I think, saying that they deserve to sit in the kind of the pantheon as all these other, bands that people consider hip. And the Duran Duran are hip. Everyone, the fans know, but
Oh yeah.
not everyone needs to know.
Definitely. Well, Annie, thank you so much for joining us on Encore's Club
Absolutely.
today. And we're definitely going to be sharing this, and we're going to be sharing it over at Daily Durani as well, because
Yay.
all the Duranians are going to be thrilled to hear from you. And hopefully, we can get you back on after the book's out and we've read it. I know Rhonda wanted to digest it and come up with lots of questions about the book after
Uh-oh.
you read it. So we're going to invite you back. Hopefully, get you on again if your virtual book tour is not too packed.
That'd be good. I would be happy to do that.
And what's the easiest way for people to follow you on the socials?
Just follow me on Twitter is probably the best way at Annie Zaleski.
Awesome. This is Jason, Velvet Rebel. See you again soon on the Encores Club. Make sure you pre order Duran Duran Rio 33 and a third series. Take care.